by means of secondary causes. Then here's the criticism of the Ash'ari position, which Jafed was talking about. This is Ibn Taymiyyah talking. Whoever, meaning a strict Ash'ari, says that he acts with them and not by means of them, biha, opposes what the Quran has brought and denies what God has created of potencies, quwwa, powers, and natures. Whoever opposes the idea whoever opposes the idea of secondary causation, according to Ibn Taymiyyah, which is the Ash'ari view, opposes what the Quran has brought and denies what God created of potencies and natures. This is similar to denying what God created of potencies that are in living beings, by which living beings act, like the power of the servant. So the servant himself has the quwwa, has a power to actually act, has the potency to act. This is what Ibn Taymiyyah said. So does he reject secondary causation? No. Now, that was what Ibn Taymiyyah said. Now, this is John Hoover's explanation of that text. He says, in other texts, Ibn Taymiyyah gives numerous examples of God's creation through secondary causality. The Tadmuriyah, which is a famous text written by Ibn Taymiyyah, passage translated above, includes a polemic first against those who say that God creates only with or at the instance of the causes, but not by them. This is leveled against the tradition of strict Ash'arism, in which whatever appears to be causally connected is simply a matter of God creating things conjoined at the same place and time. So the view that Jafed is talking about, Ibn Taymiyyah criticizes, and John Hoover is mentioning that. He says the human act does not occur by means, and then he goes on and on further. So the point is, Ibn Taymiyyah affirms secondary causality, affirms that the human beings have a quwwa, have a power, and he affirms that secondary causality. Humans have that, right? And secondary causality exists in creation. There are potencies and natures. And he says to deny that, you're going against the Quran. Now, furthermore, John Hoover says, Ibn Taymiyyah adds furthermore that God makes one thing a cause of another thing, and that what God has determined has been determined to happen by means of secondary causes. In summing up these positions, Ibn Taymiyyah cites a saying which he elsewhere attributes to Al-Ghazali and Ibn al-Jawzi in their writings on complete trust or complete faith. So here's what Ibn Taymiyyah quotes from Ghazali and what he's criticizing. Obliterating the causes by denying that they are causes is an aberration with respect to reason. Abandoning the causes entirely is defamation of the law. So he's saying, taking the position of the Asharis, Ibn Taymiyyah is saying, taking the position of the Asharis of denying secondary causation goes against reason and goes against the Quran. You see that? So when you say it's silly, we agree. That's why we don't have the Ash'ari position. So don't quote the Sanusi creed, right, when you're dealing with an ethity like Daniel. You can't use Imam Ahmed against him and then say, oh, you must also accept what the Ash'ari say and deny secondary causality. You're all over the place.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So normally, the issue with occasionalism is that once you affirm occasionalism, you're going to have to explain how you get free will out of that. That's what you're going to have to explain. However, on the other hand, if you affirm all these other views, concretism or conservatism, or all these other ones, any other one that is not occasionalism, you're going to have to explain God's power. And if God really has power over those things, you're going to have to explain that. So it depends on which bullet you're ready to bite. Both of them think they can explain it. So for instance, the occasionalists or the Asharites, for instance, they will say, we have free will, but God's power is absolute. And whatever God wills, that's what's going to happen. Okay? And if you add that, they have motivation, clear motivations for thinking like that, given the concept of qadar and many other things in Islam, and the idea of God being the absolute power. So they have motivation to want to show God's power more. And free will is you're going to have to redefine what you mean by free will. Such that they propose the theory of Qasb, for instance. And on the other hand, those guys that want to say no occasionalism, they're going to give some kind of power to the creation. Now, if that power is also dependent on God's will, that's why I made the argument that what they're really saying doesn't work. The power you're talking about is still subject to God's will. So the power is only effective if God allows it at every single moment. Isn't that occasionalism? Like, what are you talking about? I never got that part. Like, let's say someone wills to do something. Let's say, okay, free will. You will for something to be. and God's will agrees with that. Okay, fine. That's what we call sunnah. And now you will for something, or you want to do something with your power, and God says no. Who is going to go here? If it's you that will go and God's will will remain, that's what we need for occasionalism. So you're going to have to explain to us. Now they will put some, I think the argument is going to be based on some kind of other principle that God, maybe wisdom or some kind of external principle, that they will say that God wouldn't allow that. Like God wouldn't do that. They will say something like that. Like, okay, for instance, they will say, let's say we have power and we want to do in some of our things, God has to leave us alone. That kind of thing. God wouldn't interfere. Some will push it too far and they'll say it will be a contradiction for God to interfere. The other ones will say God will simply not interfere because of wisdom or some kind of reason. That's why God wouldn't interfere. It's not like he can't, but he wouldn't. Some will say he can't interfere. That would be like the Mu'tazila. But the other guys, they will say God can, but he won't. You get that kind of thing. So yeah, it's all about that. But my own contention is not actually about will or this thing, because I also believe in free will, and I try to explain how free will exists in my theory of Kasb. But when we talk about power, that's the one I have issue with. When you want to go so far to affirm something called power, and you say the creation also has power, that's where I come in. I'm like, no. It seems to be that the Quranic evidences point out La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah and other things to show that God only has power. So you're going to have to redefine what you mean by power also. Okay? Just like you redefine what you mean by free, you're going to have to redefine what you mean by power, such that we cannot compare you having power and God having power. Because the real power will belong to God ultimately. Because your own power is a contingent, dependent, derived power. Therefore, it cannot be called power in the real sense. And I'll make an argument of the kind of using aseity. Similar argument to the one I made for aseity. For instance, for the Christians, they believe that Jesus was caused to exist by the Father, and yet he's still God. And we usually make the argument that the moment your existence is dependent on another, you cannot be God. By definition, the moment you get your existence from another, you cannot be God. If you are from another, or you exist because of another, you cannot be God. God exists independently, in and of himself. God does not exist from or in, or God exists, simple, without any cause. So that same argument, we can use it here to show that the moment your power is derived or from or dependent on another, then that power cannot be called power. It should be called something else. That's what my whole argument is. So la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah will be true because only God has power by definition, necessarily. Your own power, what you are calling power, is God allowing you or creating those things in the first place. So secondary power is superfluous. There's no point in talking about secondary power in the sense that you want to push it. You get, because you call them real power. What do you mean by real? And why are you against us, the occasionalists? When we say God creates all of it, what's the point of wanting to affirm power for creation? Like, what is the point? You see, it will go back to the whole notion of responsibility and morality. That's what most people have issue with. Like, if we are not free, God can hold us responsible and those kind of things. Funny enough, I found one verse in the Bible, it's in Romans, that talks about the pot and the potter. And maybe I've not thought about it deeply, but that analogy is actually a very funny analogy. But if you read that in Romans, when he was talking about that, can the pot complain to the potter that why did you form me like this? That kind of thing. But read Muhammad Hijab's explanation on this whole issue of free will and determinism, and you will see that there is no answer in a clear-cut way. To me, the safest, most conservative way is the Asharite occasionalism. Because we are giving all power back to God. If anything goes wrong, at least I gave all power back to God. I didn't reserve it for some other creation, giving them secondary power. To me, that's safer than doing that. You talk about wisdom, hikmah. When you go and scrutinize that, you will realize that you don't know what that hikmah is, that wisdom is. You don't know it. That all this idea of morality and responsibility, when we go and push you, what is the hikmah? You will realize that you say Allahu Alam. Because God will do things that you'll be like, what is this? And He will do other things that you'll be like, that is, which one? If God is doing all of it, the hikmah will be beyond us. The knowledge why He's doing that will be beyond us anyway. So, and it will be because of His own will. The reason why God is doing it, He knows it. So why would I be talking about hikmah when I would just talk about God's irada, His will? Whatever God wills, man yasha'u. Okay? So, to me, the Asharite position is safer. And there's no point in thinking that, we don't affirm that. What do you affirm? I'll show you the problems in whatever you affirm. Any objection to the occasionalist view will apply to you. And by the time we scrutinize your method, you will either reduce God's power or say God cannot do something. That's what it will turn to. And when you start saying things like that, you'll be like, what? Why would I say that about God? So, yeah, everyone should think about this. And you will see, it's not as easy as people often make it look. So, anyway, see you guys later. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.